the first mom created David Armstrong, so got a number of.
All right. Here we go.
I'm confident. Where's the little thingy? Oh, there it is. I'm doing 20s fashion. Boom. So what we're gonna look over today is men's fashions, men's hat, women's fashion, and women's hairstyles. I also have like some little ads in here because I want it to make it look like it's a magazine that you're flipping through the pages of. So yeah. So first we'll start with men's fashion. So through the 20s, we got a lot of less form-fitting and very less layers of clothes on like a regular like day, obviously. And it's more of just a simplistic style for people to go off of. So these are Oxford bags, which they look a little silly and almost like a horse jockey's pants. But
Silly.
yeah.
I wore them.
But they mainly came up in style because it was used for university people to get around the ban of wearing shorts at times. Or honestly, I didn't do much research into that or like why they did that, but it was just more of just like stuffing them up and then stick them in your sock, and it was just an easier way to get around the place without having to possibly get dress coded or something. And there's also a very similar thing to this, just called plus fours, which is also another kind of pants, and it's what we kind of see as like the wide-legged, ultra wide-legged like trousers that people wear. And it's very similar to that, and it's mainly for show like free movement, kind of like that. And a lot of this stuff was for men's leisure wear, so it could also be for working, but also for afterwards, because golf and tennis became a very popular sport around this time. And so it was easy to, look elegant while being sweaty at the point. Like you're, on the court or on the course, having like wearing a sweater, all these things, make it seem like it's something that you can also go to work in, but you can relax in. And a fashion icon at this time was Prince Edward's of Wales. And he was one of the most photographed members of like the Wales family or something around that time. And his fashion became a real big style for US and Europe. And he kind of wore like similar things to the Oxford bags. And he was usually wearing like Argyle sweaters, stuff like that, all those sort of things. And so he really popularized what men's fashion was at that time. And then we'll go on to men's hats. I didn't want to put that much in there for hat etiquette and wearing the wrong hat because there's a lot about hats. So, like straw hats, there was like an importance for that. Like, summer days, you would wear that. You would wear felt hats during the winter months, just sort of those things. And, you have to have proper etiquette, like when to take your hat off in certain places, when to, put it under your arm and shake someone's hand, not wear a hat, all those sorts of things. It was, very strict to be that sort of on tee with everything, so you can be as much of a gentleman that you can as possible. And later on in the 20s, less hats kind of showed more of you're healthy. I looked into that like a little bit on the stuff I looked into, and there's not much before it of saying why they started to have less hats, but it's confusing. And then obviously, the fedora is mostly popular from this time. And then we're going to move on to women's fashion. So women's fashion was somewhat similar to the men's in ways of it being simplistic and, having less layers on, which you would see with here with like the low waist seams and of dresses and what we would call the flapper. Well, the flapper was usually to show off the woman's calves and their shoulders, and they would have little tassels hanging on to add that sort of flair with their personality. Because what is defined as like a flapper girl is that they would, you know, um, they were the modern girl of the time. They would be at bars, they would go to speakeasies, they would be dancing, they would be talking about their sexual encounters with other men and all those sorts of things. So it's very risque at that time. And so it's just pushing the norm of what a woman should be like. And the main icon at the time is Coco Chanel. And we all know her, possibly for her perfume, but also she was not really a good person. But that's a whole separate thing. But she idolizes stuff. She basically created the flapper by wearing a men's button-up shirt and putting a belt around her waist and cinching it as tight as possible to create that somewhat small flare down there. And then we'll have a whole bunch of other styles, just like evening wear. It's somewhat still simplistic, but having like ornate beadwork in there or layering necklaces to show the depth, because what you really wanted to be as a woman in the 1920s is as skinny as possible, because that was the standard. So is that. And then we go on to what women's hairstyles. Well, the way of the bob and the wave are one of the most iconic looks of, hairstyles in the 1920s, because women wanted to be exotic. They wanted to be out there. They wanted to be out there. They didn't want to be confined to a certain type of lifestyle, just like the flapper would. They were, hair short up to here, very straight, or if you wanted to do something such as the wave, where you would take gel and you would create like a somewhat like an S shape in your hair and hold that in place for like hours on end so it can, stay and stick well. It's those sorts of things, beauty is pain. And another thing about, women's hairstyles is they wanted to be seen possibly as androgynous, such as, the short hair, stuff like that, all those sorts of things. They wanted to be seen as possibly, some women wanted to be seen equal to men at points. So there's my little thing about and then I found some little advertisements I found funny. It was vitamin donuts. Yeah. A massive thing of Jello, and then National Oats makes kids husky. So yeah, that's my slide. I didn't know. I think I went too fast on it.
It's good. No, perfect time. Any questions on that? Yeah, it's good to hear the style like that. Good. Getting like these hot iron, like almost like a waffle with thick hair in it.
Yeah.
And hold it there. That's kind of dangerous, scary thing. So use those. All right. Who would like to go next?
Wait, so this is maybe a stupid question, but is the Gangsters when we dress up Mr. Partridge, is that mandatory?
Okay, so what did you think about Gangsters? I'm gonna give you, I was gonna do it on Thursday, but I think we start watching the movie, we're not gonna have time. So I'm gonna move the Gangsters till next. So I'll give you a little more time.
Talk about our outfit.
Huh?
We have to talk about our.
No, you just have to
Oh. Okay.
try to be as close as your character you get. It's a twofold, it's an assignment. But if you decide not to dress up, then you have a part B, you have a second part of this. Do the dress up or do something else.
So do I have
It might involve bringing us some truth.
to dress up as your
And or close you can get.
it's your personality? Well, what if I'm gonna dress up as a gangster?
Okay, dress up as a gangster.
Like, like,
Yeah. As long as you can dress up like somebody's presentation we saw. How about that?
right.
Is everyone good on that one?
Don't dress up, there's a different.
Yeah, it'll be no big deal. No,
What's the different assignment?
it'll probably involve food. I'm hungry. All right, here we go. I want to hear Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie and Clyde went off for a ride. All right. Oh, and no submachine gun. Is that clear? Okay, good.
Cool.
All right, here we go.
So I did Bonnie and Clyde, and I feel like this is like a really popular one. Everybody probably knows who Bonnie and Clyde are. So Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas. Her father died when she was just 4 years old, and her mother moved their family to West Dallas. And she lived there for like all the way up until she was a young adult, and she was kind of quoted as being like just a quiet little quiet girl who was pretty reserved. She was a good student. She wrote poetry, and two of her most famous ones are the story of Suicide South, and The Trail Ends. But despite the fact that she was a good student, when she was a sophomore in high school, she met a man named Roy Thornton, and they dropped out of high school together and got married 6 days before Bonnie turned 16 years old. They didn't stay married for very long though, and because Roy was he was absent a lot, he was never there. They never truly got divorced, but they never saw each other again. And when Bonnie died, she was still wearing the wedding ring that he gave her on her finger. So that's yeah. Oh, I don't remember how old he was. I think they were close to the same age though. Um, okay, so after she left him, she moved back home to West Dallas and she became a waitress. And one of her regulars at the restaurant she worked at, actually ended up becoming a part of the posse that tracked her down later in life. So I just thought that was an interesting fact. And then in 1929, this is kind of crucial to the whole thing about with her going off with Clyde, but she kept a diary and she wrote of how impatient she was with her life and how lonely she was. So that kind of just leads into the rest of the story. Okay, and Clyde, there's a lot about Clyde, so I'm gonna have to kind of talk a little bit fast here. So he was born in 1909. He was born into a poor family, and they lived in south of Dallas, but they moved closer to Dallas when he was younger, and they lived in a wagon because did not have enough money to even buy a house. They lived in their wagon until they had enough money. He was first arrested when he was 17, and because he ran from the police when they confronted him about he didn't return his rental car on time, so he ran and then he was arrested. But then he was released soon after that. And then he bounced from different different jobs to job. He could never keep a steady job, but at the same time as he was doing that, he was also running small crimes, and he was stealing cars and robbing stores and all of that stuff. And then during that time is when he met Bonnie, which I'll talk about in a second. When he was 21 years old, he got caught stealing a car, and he was sent to East Ham Prison Farm, which is going to be a big part of his story. But while he was there, the first a little bit after he was there, Bonnie smuggled a weapon into him, and then he escaped, but then he was recaptured, and then was sentenced to, oh, I didn't write it down, but he was sentenced a long sentence. While he was there, there was a lot of really bad things that happened to him in prison. He was frequently sexually assaulted by other inmates, and in one particular instance, he ended up retaliating against the guy that was attacking him, and he killed this guy with a pipe. But he actually did not have any repercussions from this because there was another inmate that was already serving a life sentence that just took responsibility for it. I didn't really go much into that, I guess. But while he was sentenced there, he was supposed to work hard labor in like the fields around the prison, and he purposely chopped off two of his toes so he would avoid having to do that. But literally 6 days after he chopped off both of his toes, he was released from prison. Yeah, cause his mom, yeah, he had no idea that he was gonna be released at all, so he kind of walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and that's kind of sucks. So after he got out, he just kind of went back into his whole like normal thing of like robbing businesses with the Barrow Gang, which was a bunch of like was his brother and then a bunch of like other people that they knew. Um, the he was also quoted as his goal after he was released from prison, his goal was not to intentionally seek any fame from his crimes, but to enact revenge against the Texas prison system for his abuse. So that kind of also plays into his story. These are just some pictures of where he was. Like there was no privacy in their bunk room, and then this is like the labor fields that he was trying to avoid. Okay. Their first meeting. So there's not like any one particular account that's like super credible, but the one that most people tend to go with is that they were just at the home of Clyde's friend, and they saw each other from across the room, and they just kind of both happened to fall in love with each other, and then they became friends, and then and then entered their relationship and stuff. And yeah, I couldn't really find like a great account on that. Okay, so their crime spree. So this started in 1932, when they began traveling with Raymond Hamilton. But he left their group after a few months, and then he was replaced by William Daniel Jones. Then Clyde's brother Buck was released from prison in 1933, and then he brought his wife Blanche with them. So then the gang had 5 people in total. They kind of just went on a series of robberies, and they made national headlines, and it's kind of made law enforcement like really eager to arrest them. On July 29th, 1933, but there was an altercation, and Buck was shot and fatally wounded during a shootout with police, and Blanche was apprehended by the police. On After that November, William Daniel Jones was captured and arrested. So then they were down to just Bonnie and Clyde. Okay, and then on January 16th, they had a plan to break several inmates out of Eastham State Prison. There were 5 prisoners that they ended up releasing, including Raymond Hamilton, who was arrested in the time period of when he left the group to when this happened. But 2 guards ended up being killed during their escape. So that was on their murder record. And then on April 1st of 1934, they encountered 2 highway patrol officers near Grapevine, Texas. And before either of the officers could defend themselves or get have the chance to pull their guns out at all, Bonnie and Clyde shot them to death. And then on April 6th, there was an officer in Miami, Oklahoma, who was shot, and Bonnie and Clyde also abducted another police chief, but then they released him a few hours later. The FBI posted wanted notices like this around, and they were given to every police station in the South. But while they were doing this and like distributing these, they found a connection to the Methvin family, who was also one of the prisoners that was released, that Bonnie and Clyde released from prison. And they found out that the pair was on their way to Louisiana, where the Methvin family house was, driving a stolen car. And on the way to Louisiana, they discovered that there was a party that had happened at Black Lake, Louisiana, and that had happened on May 21st, and they were due to return back on May 23rd. just 2 days later. So on May 23rd, a posse of police officers from both states came in and they hid in the bushes along the highway, and basically they ambushed Bonnie and Clyde, but they attempted to drive away, but the officers opened fire too quickly and they died like instantly. Like they shot the car like bad, and I have a couple pictures of that. Over 167 bullets were fired in under 20 seconds. So yeah, that's their car that was completely destroyed. They died like instantly, and yeah. And then obviously I had to talk about the movie. Has anybody in here seen the movie? Am I like at all? Okay. I've watched this before so many times. It's such a good movie. But it's not as like accurate to like the story. So like, there's a lot of things that I learned. I was like, oh wow, they don't talk about this in the movie at all. But it was one of the first R-rated movies. And they basically were depicted as like a form of like Robin Hood, of like robbing the rich to like give back to their families and stuff. And it like definitely glamorized the whole like gangster culture and stuff.
It's a good story.
It is.
It's a really good story. Nice job. Well, now. What do we have next? You go bootleg?
Right. Oh,
Gambling?
Yeah. Two favorite pastimes. All right, so bootlegging is a pretty broad subject, but I try to make it as concise as possible. So what is it? Well, it's illegal smuggling or selling of alcohol. Of course, most popular during the Prohibition era. And organized crime, such as the mafia in like New York, Chicago, grew immensely during this time. Give them a source. Of course, you can't talk about bootlegging without prohibition. So the background to prohibition, temperance movement, ever since the Industrial Revolution, because you need workers to not be hungover. Started in the UK, and also with the Second Great Awakening, religious figures saw alcohol as ruining nations. Due to the 18th Amendment, Women's Christian Temperance Union, obviously tried to protect the American youth. Famous person from this was Carrie Nation, who destroyed bars. During World War I was also linked with unpatriotic citizenship because, of course, Germans are known for drinking beer, and we were fighting. And there was immense pressure on government to take action against alcohol. So the 18th Amendment was passed in January of 1919, banned manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol. And drinking would go down as a whole, but the binge drinking would go. Now, because of bootlegging, organized crime, like I said before, grew immensely. Basically, kickstarted it in the U.S. Racketeers and urban city bosses dominated the industry. They smuggle whiskey across the border, such as in Canada, or they would smuggle it into ports like New York, Boston. Profits were very enormous. That mafia before were like kind of small, but they could hire a lot of people, accountants, lawyers, such as George Ramos right there from Illinois. Of course, they bribe police to look the other way, which further led to the growth of prohibition. And it was big in cities like New York, Detroit, Seattle, Boston, St. Louis. And of course, speakeasies were just underground bars, illegal ones. Also contained gambling, which is pretty fun. They were either really classy, like such as having jazz bands, or just looking really glamorous, or just being in the basements of people's apartments or homes. Again, police paid off. Everyone knew about these bars, but nothing was really done about them. And of course, Chicago was probably one of the biggest examples of the mafia and bootlegging. Of course, New York also had this big problem. Of course, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was like the climax of this, and it would be kind of the downfall for bootlegging with organized crime. Famous bootleggers, such as obviously Al Capone, Jack Diamond, Bugsy Siegel, Lee Petty. He was actually pretty good at vehicular manslaughter, it said, but he won a Daytona 500 stuff. It's okay. And then William McCoy. And bootlegging basically started NASCAR as well. Many prominent bootleggers from the South, from like the Carolinas, Alabama, Georgia, such as Junior Johnson and the aforementioned Lee Petty. And of course, they'd soup up their cars that were mostly Ford Coupes. They'd run away from the police. Then police were gone when Prohibition went away, so they just raced each other. And then downfall of it, when FDR was elected in 1933, it was clear the amendment was not working, so they repealed it in February 1933. With it no longer illegal, you know, you need to smuggle it. Profits weren't there. Of course, mafia went to other businesses. Bootlegging did not go extinct, but definitely a lot smaller than it used to.
Good job, yeah. In fact, and that one you covered a lot of things, and like NASCAR be a really good example on things like that. That's good. Nice job. And one thing, yeah, the bootlegging now is to avoid the tax. That's the whole thing, just to avoid that. Ready? Maybe. Oh. There.
Okay, gambling and bookmaking. On and I can. On the next.
Oh, I forgot the mouse. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we got it. Okay, fun fact, gambling is bad and you probably shouldn't do it because unless your name's Ethan. Okay, so bookmaking. So bookmaking is basically like if you've seen The Sting, you know what bookmaking is. You're basically like you're betting on like someone or something to win in like a sports game or a competition, or horse races especially were big back in the 20s and 30s. Most that exist in the US today are illegal, but there are some legal ones, such as sports books and casinos. And they're also sometimes called bookies or turf. So gambling in the US. So gambling was legal for a while until about 1910, which is shortly before Prohibition, but it was outlawed in the entirety of the United States, kind of went along with the temperance movement, like gambling's bad, ruins your family, ruins morals. Yeah, then that photo is a picture that I took in one of the hotels in Vegas, but and legalization. So it was re-legalized back in 1931 in Nevada, unsurprisingly, as a way to keep the money flowing to the state in times of the Great Depression. It took a while for the other states to follow. I think the first one that opened back up was in New Jersey in like the 70s, if I remember correctly. So it took a while for the rest of the United States to catch back up. So most states have regulated casinos now and regulated bookmaking zones. So not in Vegas. A lot of mobsters were involved in gambling and bookmaking, especially like Bugsy Siegel. And he was the one, if you remember from Catherine's presentation, he basically started the whole like Vegas strip culture thing, and that's why it took off. Outside of mobsters owning it, most of the casinos and hotels are owned by like MGM, which is some kind of giant resort company. Like especially the Bellagio and Mandalay Bay. There's a lot of other ones though. This is one picture that I took inside the Bellagio. It says state gaming laws prohibit anyone from 21 entering the gaming area. I thought that was kind of weird. So I asked Partridge why they do that. He said apparently it was like to avoid legal trouble by calling it gaming instead of gambling. So it sounds a bit nicer. So gambling's known to be incredibly addicting. It's also known as ludomania. Similar effects to taking drugs happen if you become addicted to gambling, because it activates the brain's reward systems and you keep on doing it because there's a reward thing going on with it. It often comes along with like other mental illnesses or disorders such as anxiety, depression, or substance abuse, but it can be treated with therapy, medication, etc. And yeah, the end.
Oh, now picture that. So now you're glamorizing it for us.
Exactly. And
Yeah, gaming, so then gambling sounds bad. Gaming is just games.
yeah, it's just a
All right, good job. Give me a sec.
Like 500.
Seniors. I don't have it. Where she's at? Where? Ah! Sorry, I was in the wrong place. Wait a second. I have your email. Yeah, paper. I have your paper. I don't have your presentation.
I think I sent it like on Sunday or Saturday.
Oh, I got it. I just skipped over. I'm back. Here we go. Okay, did you enjoy it? Where did your presentation? Give me a second. Okay.
Okay, maybe a five.
Every time I go to the screen to
Isn't that the store we want? Really good. We have that license. Kidding. So suddenly, like. I
try to download it.
Oh, no, she's not.
Do you want me to send it again to you?
Did you, send me again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. And no, it's the only sex I ever made.
I don't know why, we have an issue with the presentation, it's not coming through.
Wow.
Maybe, certain, cartels trying to ban those.
It's all coming together.
We don't sit here. Let's see if we can set this up, I think.
Have one foot at the end. I think you guys are gonna find connecting up. It addresses the most.
Really weird. And won't let me download it, usually you have to download it or just go onto the screen. Can you?
Once.
Well, wait a minute, we might better do it.
Yeah, is that really hot? Hot? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, but like it's from London.
Ah, I got John one. Ah! We got past all their control. They can't stop us. All right, here we go.
Okay, so Pablo Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949, in Rio Negro, Antioquia. He was this third sibling, like the third sibling of 7 siblings, and he grew up in Medellin. He was raised by his father, that was a small farmer, and his mom, that she was a teacher. Uh, he left high school in 1966, but he returned back 2 years later with his cousin Gustavo Gaviria, and but they dropped out more than 1 year later. But he tried to continue studying, and he went to college, and he wanted to study criminal lawyer. Well, he wanted to be a criminal lawyer, politician, and later a president. But he had to like give up because of lack of. That's a picture of the town he was born. So his criminal life started in 1966. He started stealing tombstones and sandblasting the inscriptions and receiving them. Later, after dropping off school, he joined a car theft gang and went to prison in Medellin for some months before he turned 20. That's a picture of the prison he made like to build for him. Some of he started with violent crime and kidnapping and demanding ransoms. His most famous kidnapping was he kidnapped Diego Echevarria in the summer of 1971, and even though he got a $50,000 ransom, he still he killed Echevarria, and yeah. Then he started with cocaine trade in the mid-70s, and the Colombian Security Service in 1976 arrested Escobar, and like while he was returning from Ecuador from like trading cocaine, they found 39 kilograms of cocaine on one of his the tires of his car. Then a year later, the agent who arrested Escobar was assassinated, and he continued bribing politicians, but he tried to donate to political campaigns and bribing the political figures in Colombia. And in 1978, he transported 19,000 kilograms of cocaine to the US, and it went so popular that the demand increased in South America, in South Florida, California, and Puerto Rico. Then he spent millions of dollars building roads, power lines, and soccer fields for the homeless, and he also he tried to help the homeless in Colombia. His downfall in the early 90s, the Cali cartel was in a war with the Medellin cartel, and Fidel Antonio Castaño, who was known as Rambo, was an old member of the Medellin cartel, but he found out that Escobar was planning to kill him, so he created a group called Los Pepes, that is people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. And December 1st, 1999, on Escobar's 44th birthday, he celebrated and did a party with alcohol and marijuana. And the next day, they found like his hideout. And after like a chase, he was shot and killed. Then Pablo Escobar only trafficked with cocaine. No. He also trafficked animals, specifically hippos. Uh, he had like a kind of a zoo, and it was well, it's called Hacienda Nápoles. It was like a luxurious estate that was built and owned by him. He illegally transported some hippos from Africa to from there, and in like the hippos were a threat to the local ecosystem because they ate and changed the composition of the rivers. And the legacy nowadays, Escobar is known like as the king of cocaine, and he is the wealthiest criminal in history. Around 4,000 murders were committed because of him. Antioquia is the second place in the world with more hippos population because of him trading with them to Africa. And they did a show in Netflix for Narcos.
I look at the cocaine hippos, yeah, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, good job, yeah, you quite good. The hippos are made of cocaine. I don't think I wanted to hippo on cocaine. Want to try it or? Yeah, okay. All right, let's do it. Give me 32 seconds. Okay, maybe slightly longer.
What's cool about my presentation is it'll tie into like most of your guys. It's like probably like a half has ran into the Gambino family. It's a pretty extensive.
Go. What, you on the mouse?
Oh. All right. So mine and Cole's presentation was on the Gambino crime family, one of the most notable crime families in American history. All right. So the origins of this crime family date back to the beginning of the 20th century, where an Italian immigrant, Salvatore D'Aquila, I don't know if I'm saying that right. That's this guy. He had a small gang and was first arrested in 1909 for a minor fraud charge. But about 10 years later, or even, yeah, about 20 years later, during the rise of the Prohibition, his gang became a lot more powerful with bootlegging and speakeasies, as we've seen a lot of. And in 1928, D'Aquila and his right-hand man, Salvatore Maranzo, are killed in murders organized by Charles Luciano. I'm sure we're all very familiar with him. There he is. And this sparked the huge Castellanese War, which is the dominance of the five families in New York. For those of you who don't know what the five families are, they're the criminal organizations in New York that sort of control the criminal underground. And Luciano emerged victorious and sort of became the leader of D'Aquila's gang. All right, so after the Prohibition, a federal sort of group, sort of informally dubbed Gangbusters, they arrested Luciano, who was actually later released to aid American naval intelligence. And so Vincent Monago, this guy, he took over the family, and he had a lot of traditional beliefs. Like he thought honor and respect was a big part of the mafia culture. And he also dealt with a lot of the revenue loss that all sort of the major crime families faced after the Prohibition ended. And his underboss, this guy, Albert Anastasia, ran an assassination organization known as Murder Inc. And in April 1951, he disappeared, but Anastasia was behind it. And so Anastasia took over, and his rule of the family was very harsh and very brutal. You know, if you run an organization called Murder Inc., you're going to be a little bit like that. And however, in 1957, his reign came to an end when he was assassinated outside of his car. Like 4 different of the leaders have been assassinated outside of their car for this gang. And so Carlo Gambino became the new leader of the family, and he's obviously one of the most notable leaders. The gang's named after him. And some of the first things he did was he took down his big rivals, such as Vito Genovese, and Joseph Colombo. And so by taking down the rivals, he really rose to power and expanded the empire, even to other countries like Puerto Rico and and the Bahamas. And so during his reign, they made over $500 million a year. But in October 15th, 1976, Gambino passed away of natural causes. He was one of the few leaders of this who died of natural causes outside of a jail cell. And he appointed Frank Costello, which was a controversial decision for a successor because Costello was his cousin, and many people thought that that was kind of nepotism. And Frank Costello, during his ruling of the family, really kind of emphasized white collar crimes. So the murders and stuff sort of went away, and it was more about fraud and embezzlement. But one of and this is Costello. One of Costello's most outspoken critics was managing John Gotti. He was a Queens-based mobster, and in 1985, Gotti shot him. And only a few months later, in 1986, he was formally appointed as the head of the Gambino crime family. And Gotti's underboss was killed in a car bombing by loyalists to Costello. And so this sort of sparked a big case and actually led to the arrest of Gotti by both the NYPD and the FBI in 1992. And actually, John Gotti ran the Gambino crime family for almost a decade within prison until he died in 2002 when Peter Gotti, this very senior fellow, took over. And he became the boss until he got arrested in 2003. He was one of the more underwhelming leaders of the crime families. And that's Frank DeCiccio. All right, now we move on to the more current age in the 2000s. So some of the most notable things that have happened in recent history are in 2009, 29 members of the family were arrested in connection to various schemes like drug trafficking and prostitution and abortion. And so we don't know quite who is currently running the family. We know that Domenico Cipollao, he was a smuggler from Sicily. He briefly ran the family. Frank Cali ran the family, but he was assassinated in 2019, also outside of his car. And according to the FBI, they believe that Lorenzo Manio is the current leader of the mob, but there's not that much information on him. And the family continues to operate in New York, and they have multiple criminal connections throughout the country, actually. And so, if we look at some of their main crimes, we have extortion, bookmaking, illegal gambling, hijacking, money laundering, loan sharking, extortion, prostitution, murder, racketeering, fencing, and speakeasies. So they have quite a history. And that's the end of the presentation.
What's
Here are the
fencing?
sources. You know, I forgot. I remember I looked it up. It has something to do with money.
Involved like sword fighting?
No, unfortunately, and it also doesn't involve making fences.
Anyone know? Anyone know? Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
sounds so good.
That's right.
All right. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Good presentation, everybody. Make sure you take that note home. All right, the planet to start the untouchable tomorrow. Tuesday got a haircut. You did. Yeah. I'll put the salt back tonight. That's cereal.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. Good job, everybody. So tomorrow, we're ready to roll? Awesome. Good. Got it in? Good. Everyone did well. Nice job. Yeah.
It's already open. Bottle flip.
Hands on the top. See you. See you tomorrow. I got a lot of work for people. I don't either. I'm with you. Maybe one of these, would you please, one day before the end, yeah. Yeah, no problem. Good.